11 people sat in that little conference room, and every one of them thought they were there to carve my husband up before he was even cold. The lawyer laid a single sheet of paper on the table and slid it down toward my stepson. Garrett read it once. He read it twice. And then his whole face just drained, like somebody pulled a plug in the bottom of him. Raylene shot up out of her chair so fast it cracked against the wall. She said, "That is not possible. That is Vance's land. That is his land." And for the first time in 26 years, I looked her dead in the eye and I said it out loud. "No, Raylene, it is not his. It has been mine for 18 years. And not one of you ever bothered to read the paper that said so. My name is Corinne Vance. I am 72 years old, and I spent 30 of those years behind the counter of a bank in the Texas Hill Country, back when your handshake still meant something, and I could smell a lie across a loan desk. If you are listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments. And please, stay with me until the end. I met Emmett Vance the way I met most people back then, from the wrong side of a teller window. This was the spring of 2000. I was 46, running the branch out on the county road, and he came in on a Tuesday looking like a man who had already lost the argument he was about to have. Sun cracked across the back of his neck, boots that had seen 1,000 mornings. He set his hat on the counter, crowned down like a gentleman, and he asked me real quiet if there was any way in the world to restructure a note before the whole thing came down on his head. Cattle prices were in the toilet that year. His operating loan was underwater and the man knew it. I looked at his numbers for a long minute. Then I looked at his hands, and I told him the truth, which is what I always did, because a bank is just a building full of people lying to each other about money, and I got tired of that in my 20s. I said, "Mr. Vance, your problem is not that you are broke. Your problem is that you are honest, and honest men make the worst borrowers, because they will not walk away from a debt to save their own skin." He laughed at that. First time I heard it, it was a good laugh, the kind that starts low in the chest. We were both a little beat up by then. I had buried my first husband 4 years before. A quiet accountant named Ashby, who left me a small insurance settlement and a habit of putting 10% away before I paid a single bill. Emmett had a divorce behind him that he never talked about. Two people who already knew what it costs to lose somebody and were not real interested in wasting time about it. We married that fall at the courthouse in Blanco. No cake, no bridesmaids, no fuss. His buddy Roy Dabney stood up for him, and my friend Junie Ashcroft cried into a paper napkin. And that was the whole show. The ranch was called Vance Land and Cattle. 640 acres of hill country, cedar and live oak and good bottomland along the creek. Third generation, homesteaded by Emmett's granddad with a mule and a bad temper. Emmett had rebuilt the main house himself out of limestone he pulled off his own land, stone by stone, over about 6 years. There was one live oak out front, older than the county, and he strung a porch swing off the low branch, and that is where we drank our coffee every single morning for a quarter century. Out by the barn he kept the branding iron, the Vance brand, a rocking V, registered down at the county the same as any deed. That iron hung on a nail where his granddad hung it, and Emmett used to say the same thing every time he lit the forge. He would say a brand is just a name burned into something, so nobody can argue about who it belongs to. I did not understand yet how much I would come to hate that sentence, and then love it. Here is the thing you need to know about me before any of the rest of it makes sense. I do not flinch. 30 years of counting other people's money will do that to you. I have sat across a desk from men twice my size, while they cried and while they threatened, and my hands never once shook. Numbers do not flinch. Neither do I. Emmett knew that about me from that first Tuesday, and it is the whole reason he trusted me with what he trusted me with later. There was one promise I made that man, one thing he asked me to carry, and I carried it for 18 years without telling a living soul, even when it cost me. But I am getting ahead of myself, and this story only works if I tell it in order. Emmett came with children, two of them from Faye, the first wife. Garrett, who is 46 now, and Colleen, 42. And Lord, did they never let me forget I came second. Garrett wanted to be his daddy so bad it made him mean. He leased his own little spread over the next county and ran cattle on it, but the boy could not hold on to a dollar to save his life. Drought 1 year, prices the next. A new truck he had no business buying, always some reason. And every few months, hat in hand, he would sit at his father's table and say, "Dad, I just need a bridge for 6 months. You know I am good for it." He said that 11 times over the years. He was never once good for it. Emmett kept a running tally in his head the way ranchers do, and one night in the dark, he told me the number. 140,000, he said, staring up at the ceiling, and not one dime of it back. Faye did not just leave him. She ran off, honest to God, in 1,998. Shacked up with a fella from her office and filed papers before the month was out. Garrett was 18. But that is not the story that boy grew up telling himself. Faye told him his daddy traded her in for a younger model, and Garrett swallowed it whole and chewed on it for the rest of his life. It was a flat lie. Emmett waited 2 full years after that divorce before he so much as bought a woman a cup of coffee. I was that woman. Garrett looked at me for 26 years and saw the lie his mama planted, and there was never a thing on this earth I could do about it. Colleen was the cold one, but cold in that polite way, the kind of woman who is always keeping score under the table while she passes you the potatoes. She did accounting work up in the city. In 26 years, she called me Corinne every single time. Never anything warmer, never anything colder. Never, Mom, not once, and I never asked her to, because you do not beg somebody to love you. You just leave the porch light on and wait. There is one thing I want you to hold on to, because it comes back around. A few years into the marriage, Emmett called the whole family out to the ranch, sat everybody down at the kitchen table, and handed each grown child a folder. "Ranch papers," he said. "The way this place is set up, the way it is protected." He wanted them to read it, and he was serious enough that he made every one of them sign a little slip, saying they got their copy. Colleen took hers and thumbed through it out of habit. Garrett did not even open his. I watched him carry that folder out to his truck and toss it up on the dash. And as far as I know, it sat in that cab and yellowed in the sun until it fell apart. Remember that folder. It is going to matter more than anything else in this whole story. Over the mantel, Emmett kept our wedding photo. Him in a borrowed blue tie, me in a cream dress I bought off the rack, the two of us squinting on the courthouse steps. Every holiday, 25 of them, Garrett would walk right past it like it was a light switch. Colleen would let her eyes touch it just long enough to slide away. Neither one of them ever asked me one single question about the day it was taken, or about the 18 years of quiet work hanging in the wall behind it that they could not see and never once thought to look for. And then Emmett got sick, and every quiet thing I had been holding all those years started to matter more than I ever wanted it to. It was the fall of 2025 when the doctors put a name on it: pancreatic. Stage 3 by the time anybody caught it, which is the way that particular monster likes to work, sneaking around in the dark until it is too far along to run off. The oncologist up in the city was a decent man, and he did not lie to us. And I have always been grateful for that, because I have sat across enough desks from people who lie kindly, and it does not help anybody. He said if we were lucky, we had a year. Emmett looked him square in the face and said, "Well, I have been lucky my whole life, so let us not start doubting it now. We got 11 months. I have decided that counts as lucky. The house changed the way a house does when death moves into the spare room. Slow at first, then all at once. I was up every 4 hours with his medications, changing sheets, driving that 40-minute stretch into the city, and back twice a week with the radio off, because neither of us had anything to say that a song could carry. There is a kind of tired that sleep does not touch. I lived in it for the better part of a year, and I would do it again tomorrow. What I was not ready for was how fast the buzzards started circling a man who was still breathing. Garrett showed up more in those 11 months than he had in the 10 years before. and not once was it to sit with his daddy. He came to help. That is the word he used. Help, and every time he said it, something in my stomach turned over. He would let himself into the ranch office, the little room off the mud porch, where Emmett kept every record of that place going back to his granddad. And he would sit himself down at the desk like he already owned it, just getting things organized. Dad, he would say, making sure the bills are handled. And Emmett, God love him, was too weak by then to fight his own son over a stack of mail, and I was too flat wore out to fight him for it either. I gave that boy more rope than I should have. I have thought about that a lot since. Colleen came on Sundays. She brought flowers. She held her father's hand. She sat by the bed and read to him from the paper. And she also, 3 separate times that I know of, walked into that ranch office when she thought I was busy with the medications and stood at the old copier running pages. I know because that copier keeps a count, the little number in the corner of the screen, and it is a bookkeeper's brain I have got. I cannot help it. I read the number every time I walk past. It jumped 30-some pages in a single weekend. Financial statements, the operating agreement, anything with a dollar figure on it. I did not say one word. I just filed that away in the same place I file everything, quiet, dated, and waited to see what it was for. You want to know the truth of it. I understood them better than they understood themselves. I had spent 30 years watching families come apart across a loan desk the minute somebody died. Money does not change people. It just turns the lights on and shows you who was standing there in the dark the whole time. Near the end, on one of the bad nights, Emmett grabbed my wrist. His grip was almost nothing by then, just bones and old strength, but his eyes were clear as creek water. He said, "Do not let them cut up the land, Corinne. Whatever they do, do not let them carve it into pieces and sell it off by the acre." And then he said something I did not expect, something I have carried around ever since. He said, "And do not let them make you small. You are the biggest thing that ever happened to this place. Do not let them shrink you down to fit their story." I promised him both. I did not fully understand yet why he was so worried, since I, of all people, knew exactly how that ranch was put together and exactly whose name held it up. But I promised. You do not argue with a dying man about the one thing keeping him calm. Emmett Vance passed on a Tuesday morning in May of this year, 2026, at 6:14 in the morning, with his hand in mine and the light just coming gray through the window over the live oak. 77 years old. The monitor went flat and the room went quiet, and I sat there holding on to him for the longest time before I could make myself push the button that would fill the room with strangers. He was 51 when I married him, and I got 26 years, and it still was not enough. It is never enough. Anybody who tells you different has not loved anybody long enough to know. Garrett got to the house about 2 hours later. He walked into the room, looked at his father laying there, and then he looked at me. And the first words out of his mouth were not "I am sorry" or "How are you holding up?" They were, "We need to talk about the arrangements." Not the funeral arrangements. I could hear the difference. Arrangements. Like his daddy was an estate to be settled before the body was even cool. The funeral was at the little Methodist church out on the farm road, the one Emmett helped re-roof back in '09 when the hail took it. And I will tell you, the whole county turned out. Emmett had pulled calves out of ditches for half those families, mended fence for the ones who could not, co-signed notes for young men nobody else would touch. The preacher stood up there and called him a man who fixed things and did not brag about it, and every head in that church nodded, because it was true. I stood by the casket in a black dress I had owned for 20 years. Emmett bought it for me when Roy Dabney's wife passed, back when neither of us imagined I would ever wear it for him. That is where I first got a real good look at Raylene in her element. Raylene is Garrett's wife, 43, sharp as a tack and about as warm, and she had gotten herself a real estate license a few years back and spent most of her energy since chasing the kind of deal that was always just about to come through and never did. Their money was in trouble. I knew that the way I know most things, quietly from the outside. by watching, and at my husband's funeral, while other women brought casseroles. Raylene worked the room like it was an open house. I watched her corner two of Emmett's cousins by the coffee urn, watched her lean in close, watched the cousins nod. I did not have to hear the words. I have been reading rooms since before that woman was born. We held the reception back at the ranch because it is what Emmett would have wanted, and because the man loved having a full house even when he was not there to enjoy it. And it was there, in my own kitchen, with 100 people milling around out in the yard, that Raylene got me alone by the sink and decided the time was right. She said, "Corinne, honey, I know this is hard, but we are going to have to talk about the land situation sooner than later. Garrett is the oldest. It is only right the ranch stays in the family." I kept my hands in the dishwater, and I said, "Emmett is not in the ground yet, Raylene." She smiled at me, that real estate smile, all teeth and no eyes. And she said, "Somebody has to be practical, sugar. Might as well be me." I did not answer her. I have found silence bothers that kind of person more than anything you could say. She waited. I washed a cup. She left. That night, cleaning up after everybody finally cleared out, I found her bag tucked behind the coat rack by the door. I am not a snoop by nature, but that woman had already told me who she was, and I have never once regretted believing a person the first time they showed me. Inside was a folder, not a purse folder, a working folder, the kind you bring to a closing. And inside that were printed comparables for 640 acres of hill country, along with a full appraisal, estimated value, $6.4 million. There was a letter clipped to the back of it from a development outfit out of Austin, and it laid out in plain black and white a plan to subdivide the whole thing into ranchette lots, 5 acres apiece, gated entrance, the works. My husband's granddad's mule tracks, cut up and sold by the parcel. She had brought a subdivision plan to the funeral. In her purse, behind my coat rack, I closed the folder. I put it back exactly the way I found it, and I did not say a word. I went out onto the porch instead and sat in the swing under the live oak, and I let the crickets have it for a while. 640 acres of dark spread out in front of me, the fence line I could not see but knew by heart, the barn where the branding iron hung on its nail. And I thought, you have no idea what you are standing on. Not one of you. And I let that thought keep me warm. But it was the trail camera that told me the real story. We had cameras strung along the fence lines, the little ones ranchers used to catch hogs and coyotes and the occasional fool with wire cutters. I had not thought about them in months, not with everything else. But 3 days after the funeral, I was walking the north fence to clear my head, and I passed the camera on the creek gate, and something made me pull the card and take it inside and put it up on the computer. And there it was, time-stamped, the day before the funeral, the day before we buried him. Garrett, with a set of keys he had no business still having, walking a man in a golf shirt and clean boots along my fence line pointing, sweeping his arm across the bottomland like a man showing off a car lot, the developer from Austin, measuring the light, walking the frontage, while his father lay in a cold box at the funeral home 11 miles away. That was the moment I understood the grief was staging. All of it. The arrangements, the flowers, Colleen at the copier, Raylene at the coffee urn. It was not a family falling apart under the weight of loss. It was a crew, and they had been planning the sale of my home while my husband was still dying in the back bedroom. 2 days later, Raylene put it on the internet. There is a community page for the ranching families out here. A couple hundred folks, cousins and neighbors and people I had made Thanksgiving for over the years. And she wrote, right out in the open for all of them to see, that the Vance legacy belonged to Vance blood and not to some banker who married in at 50 and thought that made her people. Like and share if you agree with keeping the ranch in the real family. And they did. Cousin Odell wrote the land should stay Vance. Aunt Verna left a little heart. A woman I had driven to her own chemo appointments clicked the button and went on about her mourning. My friend Junie called me that afternoon. Junie Ashcroft, 69, retired school teacher, the closest thing I have to a sister. She said, Corinne, have you seen what that woman put up on the internet? I said, I have seen it. She said, well, what in the world are you going to do about it? And I stood there in my kitchen. In the house, I knew things about that none of them did. And I looked out the window at the live oak, and I told her the truth. I said nothing yet, Junie. The reading is Thursday, and on Thursday, every single one of them is going to find out what they never bothered to ask. The pressure came from three directions at once, and it came fast, like they had been holding it back behind a gate, and Emmett's funeral was the latch coming loose. The first one came on paper. About a week after we buried him, I got a letter from a lawyer up in Austin, a man named Roland Askew, on the kind of heavy cream letterhead that is supposed to make your hands sweat. It was addressed to me, formal Mrs. Corinne Vance, and it got right down to business. On behalf of his client, Mr. Garrett Vance, it respectfully requested that I execute a voluntary transfer of the ranch property into the estate for proper distribution among the rightful heirs. Voluntary. That word showed up 4 times in one page. And down at the bottom, real polite, it mentioned that should a voluntary resolution prove impossible, his client was prepared to file for partition and to contest any instrument that stood in the way. Partition, that is the fancy word for forcing a sale and splitting the money, cutting the land into pieces whether anybody wants it cut or not. The exact thing. Emmett grabbed my wrist and made me promise to stop. I read that letter twice, standing at the kitchen counter. Then I set it down next to the salt shaker, and I made myself supper for one, and I ate it slow, and I did not let my heart rate go up a single beat. 30 years across a loan desk. I have been threatened by better lawyers than Roland Askew before breakfast. The second one came from Colleen, and it came the way Colleen does everything, quiet and sideways and dressed up as concern. Just a text message. No hello, no how are you sleep? It said it would mean a lot to Dad's memory if the land stayed with the real family. That phrase again, the real family. I read it 3 times sitting at that same counter. 26 years of Sunday dinners I cooked. 26 years of Christmas cards I addressed to her in my own hand, and the woman was texting me from the city about the real family like I was a tenant who had overstayed. I set the phone face down. I did not answer it. Some things you do not dignify. The third one was Raylene, and Raylene does not do sideways. She had herself a barbecue out at Garrett's leased place, a Saturday, half the county invited, and I was not on the list, which is exactly how I found out about it, because a person only leaves you off a list when they want you to know you were left off. And at that barbecue, she passed around a petition, a real one, printed out, on a clipboard, going hand to hand between the paper plates and the sweet tea. We, the undersigned, support the rightful claim of Garrett Vance to the family ranch on Vance land. 23 signatures in one afternoon. And she took a picture of those signed pages and put it up on the community page with a caption that said, "The family has spoken. The family has spoken." 23 people I had fed and driven and prayed alongside, signing us a piece of paper that said I did not belong on the ground I had kept from the auction block with my own money. And every last one of them signed it without ever once asking the only question that mattered, which was whose name is actually on the paper. But I will get to that. That is Thursday. A neighbor I hardly knew stopped me at the feed store that week. She put her hand on my arm, soft the way you touch somebody at a viewing. And she said, I heard they are asking you to move on out, Corinne, and I am just so sorry. She patted me like I was already packed. The whole county had me halfway to a condo in town. Raylene had seen to that. And then on a Wednesday afternoon, I came home from picking up feed and there was a truck in my drive I did not know, parked next to Garrett's, and a man on his knees in my pasture driving a wooden stake into the ground with a rubber mallet. I sat in my own truck for a second, engine ticking, and I watched him. He had a whole roll of those stakes in the bed, orange flags stapled to the tops, and a little sighting scope on a tripod set up in my bottomland. Survey stakes. They were laying out lots. In my grass. With Emmett 11 days dead. I got out slow. I did not slam the door. Garrett came around the side of the house before I got 10 feet, and there was a fella behind him I recognized off that trail cam footage. The developer, golf shirt, clean boots, a roll of plans under his arm. Garrett threw up a hand like we were about to talk weather. Hey, Corinne. We are just getting some preliminary measurements. Nothing is decided. Just planning ahead. Planning ahead. On land his name had never touched, not for one single day of his life. And then the screen door banged, and Raylene came out onto my porch. Onto my porch. She had let herself into my house, and she was holding a fan of fabric, swatches up against the front window, like she was deciding on curtains. And she said, "Oh, Corinne, do not mind us. We were just getting a feel for the place, thinking about how we would open up this front room once we settle in." Settle in. She was picking out curtains for my kitchen, with my husband barely cold, standing in a doorway I had paid for with 30 years of my one and only life. I looked at the surveyor on his knees in my grass. I looked at the developer with his roll of plans. I looked at Garrett with his hands still up in the air like a crossing guard, and at Raylene up on my porch with her fabric swatches. And I felt something go very still and very cold in the middle of me. Not anger. I want to be clear about that. Anger is loud, and anger makes you sloppy. And I have watched anger cost people everything across that loan desk. This was the other thing, the quiet thing, the thing that comes over me when the numbers are all lined up, and I already know how the column adds. I walked past the surveyor. I walked past the developer. I walked up my own porch steps, and Raylene had to step aside to let me at my own front door. And I stopped right in front of her, close enough to smell her perfume. And I said, "Real even, you all should go on home now." She blinked. She was not used to me talking. "Garrett," said Corinne, "come on, there is no reason we cannot handle this like adults." And I turned around on my top step, and I looked at every one of them, and I said, "The reading of your father's will is Thursday, 9 o'clock, at Harlan Reeves's office in town." She said, "Reeves." "Who is Reeves?" "Dad's lawyer is Del Prentice." And I said, "Not anymore." And I did not explain it, because it was not mine to explain yet. It was Emmett's, and he had waited a long time to say it, and Thursday was his turn. Raylene's chin came up. "Whatever you think you have got," she said, "it does not change who the real family is." And I opened my own front door, and I stepped inside my own house. And before I closed it, I said the only thing left worth saying. I said, "You are right about one thing, Raylene. Thursday is going to settle exactly who is family." And then I shut the door in her face. Quiet, no slam. And I turned the deadbolt. And I stood there in my own front hall with my back against the wood, and I let out one long breath. Then I did what I always do when the world is coming apart. I went into the ranch office, and I sat down at Emmett's old desk, and I pulled the ledger. The real one. And I opened it to the page from 18 years ago. The page nobody in this family had ever seen. The page with my name on it in my own steady hand. And I ran my finger down the column the way I have run my finger down 10,000 columns. And I let the numbers tell me what they always tell me, which is the truth, whether anybody is ready for it or not. Numbers do not flinch. And neither, I promise you, was I going to. That night, the phone rang at 7 o'clock in the morning before the sun was even up good. And it was a man I had only met one time. And the first thing he said to me changed everything. I picked it up on the second ring because at my age, you are always half awake by 7 anyway. And a man's voice came through low and careful, like he was standing in an empty office with the door shut. He said, "Mrs. Vance, my name is Harlan Reeves. I was your husband's attorney." And I sat up because I knew every lawyer Emmett ever used, and Harlan Reeves was not one of them. I said, "Emmett's lawyer is Del Prentice." And the man said, "Del drew up your original will 8 years ago. Ma'am, and Del does not know about me. Your husband came to see me on his own, about 3 years back, and he came several times. And what he had me put together is something your stepson does not know exists." He paused. Then he said, "Come to my office this morning, alone, and do not tell any of them where you are going." I wrote down the address on the pad by the phone. 3rd floor, over the hardware store on Main. My hand did not shake. It has not shaken over a piece of paper in 50 years, and it was not about to start. I drove into town before the sun cleared the cedar, and the office was small and plain. 1 desk, 2 chairs, a filing cabinet, a window looking down on the feed store. Harlan Reeves was 63, gray in the beard, reading glasses on a chain. He shook my hand, and he held on to it a second longer than a stranger would. And he said, "Before I show you anything, I want you to understand something. Your husband spent the better part of 3 years getting ready for a day he hoped would never come. He planned this careful. Every bit of it was to protect you." Then he laid a thick manila envelope on the desk between us, sealed with Emmett's initials across the flap in blue ink. There were 3 things inside: a folded legal document, a stapled packet, and a sealed white envelope with my name on the front in that blocky builder's hand I would know at the bottom of the sea. He started with the packet. He said, "This is a codicil, an amendment to the will, legally binding, filed separate, witnessed independent of Del Prentice. Your husband signed it 3 years ago, right after his first scare, back when he was still driving himself to town and working the crossword in ink." He read me the 2 witnesses. Dr. Warren Seeley, Emmett's own physician, who did a capacity assessment the same day and signed off that the man was sharp as a new blade, and Roy Dabney, his best friend of 45 years. Both of them willing to stand up in any courtroom in Texas and swear Emmett Vance knew exactly what he was doing. And then Harlan read me the heart of it, slow so I would get every word. Any beneficiary who, within 6 months of my passing, harasses, threatens, sues, or attempts to seize the property or assets of my wife Corinne Vance shall forfeit their entire share of my estate, said share to be redirected into education trusts for my grandchildren, with Corinne Vance as sole trustee. I sat with that a minute. The man wrote a no contest clause, a morality clause. The lawyers call it around here an in terrorem provision, and it is good law in the state of Texas so long as it is done right. And Emmett had done it righter than most lawyers manage. He had built a wall, not around the land, around me, 3 years ago, before any of them had shown their hand. He had already known which way they would jump. I said he knew. He knew what they would do. And Harlan took off his glasses and cleaned them slow on his shirt tail and put them back on. And he said, "Your husband told me something the second time he sat in that chair you are sitting in. He said, 'I hope to God I am wrong about my kids.' But I am not wrong. And Corinne deserves better than my hoping." I had to look out the window at the feed store for a minute after that. The sun was up good now. The town was opening for the day, same as any day, not knowing a thing. Then Harlan unfolded the big document. And this is the part I had been carrying alone for 18 years. So let me tell it to you the way it happened. Back in the spring of 2008, the whole thing nearly went under. Emmett had a business partner then, a man named Lyle Crabtree, and Lyle had been skimming off the cattle operation for the better part of 2 years, cooking the invoices. And by the time the numbers finally caught up with him, the ranch was $300,000 in the hole, with the drought on top of it. The bank called the note. Emmett's own bank, not mine over in the next county. Foreclosure. 60 days. I still see him at that kitchen table with the notice in his hands. Not crying, not throwing anything, just sitting there like a man watching his own house burn from the inside and knowing the well is dry. I was 54 years old. I had $180,000 of my own, money I had saved a dime at a time across a working life, plus what was left of the settlement from Ashby. My first husband. Mine. Every bit of it earned or inherited before I ever married Emmett Vance, which matters more than you know, and I will tell you why in a minute. I went to the bank the next morning by myself, and I did not go in there as a scared wife. I went in as a woman who had run a branch for 3 decades and knew exactly what a lender will take to make a bad note go away. I paid off the debt, and then I did the thing that saved us, the thing I understood how to do, and Emmett never would have. I did not just hand him the money and pat his hand. I sat that man down and I restructured the whole operation. We rolled the ranch, all 640 acres, into a company, Vance Land and Cattle LLC. And because it was my money that carried it, and because I know how these things are built, I set it up right. I was the managing member. I held 60%. Emmett held 40, and my capital contribution, that 180,000 and more, over the years, until it came to something near 400,000 all told, went in documented as my separate property, which in the state of Texas, where everything you earn inside a marriage belongs to both of you, is the one kind of money that stays clean and yours and cannot be argued into the community pot by anybody's lawyer. 30 years of banking taught me that distinction. I built the whole thing on it. We re-registered the brand under the LLC that same year. The Rocking V, down at the county, public record, sitting right there in the courthouse where any soul with $2 and an afternoon could have looked it up. Nobody ever did. And here is the part I need you to really hear, because this is where the whole story turns, and it is not the part people expect. They knew, not the secret. The secret Emmett kept, out of pride, was that he had ever come that close to losing it, that his own partner had robbed him blind, that his banker wife had walked into a bank and saved his family's third-generation ranch with her own money, that he could not stand for his children to know, because he was a proud man, and he would rather they thought less of me than know he had failed. So he asked me to keep it quiet, and I did, for 18 years, even when it cost me every scrap of standing in that family. But the LLC itself was never a secret. It could not be. It was in every folder he handed them at that kitchen table years ago, the folders he made them sign for. It was in the operating agreement Colleen photocopied at that very copier while her daddy was dying. It was on the brand registration and the property tax rolls and the ranch checkbook. They all watched me balance for years. They knew there was a company. They knew my name was on it. They just decided, every one of them, that it was some paperwork thing the second wife handled, the banker fussing with her forms, nothing that could ever stand between a Vance and Vance Land. They looked at the most important document of their lives a dozen times over, and they never once read it, because they had already decided what it said. Emmett left me a message, through Harlan, from 3 years back. Harlan read it off his notes. He said, "Tell Corinne I never forgot, not for one single day. She probably thinks a proud old man let it slip his mind. I never did. It has been the loudest quiet thing in my chest for 18 years. I did not cry in that office. I have never been much of a crier, but I held the edge of that desk for a second. Harlan told me there were 2 more pieces to this that would not come out until Thursday. There was something built into the operating agreement, a buy-sell provision, that was going to catch Garrett flat, and I will let that land when it lands." And there was, in his words, a kind of a trap Emmett had set a long time ago, a piece of paper with a signature on it, that was going to close a door the family did not even know they had left open. He would not say more. Emmett's instructions had been specific down to the order things got read. The last thing Harlan told me, standing at the door as I left, was that Emmett had left something for me out at the ranch, in the safe in the office, behind the deed box. He said, "Your husband told me you would know the combination, and that he wanted you to have it in your hands before Thursday, so you would go into that room knowing he was right there with you." I drove home and I opened that safe, and behind the deed box, there was a small cedar wood thing about the size of a loaf of bread. And I knew the second I saw the dovetail joints in the corners that Emmett had made it himself, in his own shop, with his own hands. Probably on some afternoon 3 years ago, while I was out running errands and thought he was just resting. The lid came up sweet and clean. Cedar smell hit me like a window thrown open in winter. Inside were 2 rings, our wedding bands, his and mine. I had wondered where his went after the hospital took it off him. He had given it to Harlan months back. It turned out, to save for this, there was a photograph, a real one, printed on paper, and it was me, 18 years younger, bent over the counter at the bank signing the papers that saved the ranch. And I had not even known there was a camera in the room. He had brought one of those little throwaway cameras and stood behind me and caught me not knowing. And he had kept that picture in a drawer for 18 years. And underneath it all, there was a note, blue ink, that same blocky hand. It said, "You kept this place standing once. Now I am keeping you standing." And under that, just the one letter, E. I sat down on the floor of that office with the box in my lap, and I read it about 4 times. Then I closed the lid, and I put the box on the desk where I could see it, and I got up off that floor, because there was still work to do, and Emmett Vance did not raise a woman who stays down. Colleen came out to the ranch alone that Wednesday, the day before. No Garrett, no Raylene, no lawyer. Just her in a gray cardigan. At my kitchen table with a cup of coffee she did not drink. She said, "Corinne, I do not want this to turn ugly." And I said, "Neither do I, Colleen," and I meant it. She stirred that coffee around and around. She has her daddy's eyes, brown and steady and a little sad even when she is not sad. And she has his hands, small for a man, big for a woman, hands that were built for tools and ended up on a keyboard. She said, "The land means something to us. Dad built it." And I looked at her and I said, "It means something to me too, sweetheart, more than you have got any idea." And then she told on herself without meaning to. She said, "Garrett already filed. He is contesting the will, undue influence. He has got Askew doing it." And she stopped, and something moved across her face. And she said, "I gave them the papers, the ones from the office. I copied them and I gave them to Askew because Garrett said they proved you manipulated Dad." And she looked at me like she wanted me to tell her it was all right. I almost told her everything, right then, at that table. I almost said, "Colleen, I own this ranch. I have owned the controlling share of it since you were a young woman. Your daddy went broke and his partner robbed him, and I bought it back with my own money and never said a word because he was too proud to let you see him fall." I almost handed her the whole 18 years to spare her what was coming. But I had made Emmett a promise, and some promises you keep even when keeping them costs you. And it was not Wednesday's job to tell it. It was Thursday's. So I just said, "The reading is tomorrow, Colleen. Let us wait for that." And she left, and her coffee sat there full, and I poured it out and washed the cup. That evening they all came, 8 of them, filing into my kitchen without so much as a knock. Garrett at the head of the table, like he was running a board meeting in a room I owned. He said, "I think we all know what Dad would have wanted." And Raylene leaned against my counter and said, "You have had a good long run out here, Corinne, 20-some years living on Vance land, and it is time to let the real family take the wheel." And she looked around at all those nodding faces in my kitchen, and she said it again, right to my face. "The Vance legacy belongs to Vance blood, not some banker who married in at 50. I looked at every one of them. Cousin Odell, who I drove to the emergency room the night his appendix went. Aunt Verna, who I made Thanksgiving dinner for 11 years running. 8 people, in chairs around a table my husband built, in a house I have held up for 18 years, telling me I did not belong in it. And I did not raise my voice. I have never once needed to. I set my coffee down, and I stood up, and I carried my cup to the sink and rinsed it and dried my hands on the towel. And I turned around and I told them the only thing I had left to tell them before morning. I said, "Thursday, 9 o'clock, bring your lawyer, Garrett. Bring all of them. And then we will find out, once and for all, exactly who this family is." Thursday morning I dressed careful, not for a fight. For the last thing my husband ever asked me to do. The blue blouse with the pearl buttons, Emmett said, made me look like a woman who ran things. The pearl earrings he gave me for our 20th, black slacks, comfortable shoes. I put the cedar box in my bag, and I drove into town, and I climbed the stairs over the hardware store, and I walked into Harlan Reeves's conference room at 9 o'clock sharp. They were already there, 11 of them counting me, packed around a long table under a window that did not open. Garrett in a navy suit with his tie already loose. Roland Askew beside him with a briefcase that cost more than my first 3 trucks. Raylene in red, fingernails going tap, tap, tap on the table. Colleen in gray, hands folded, eyes down at the wood. Curtis next to her, quiet as ever. A man who married into this and clearly wished he had not on this particular morning. And then the audience Garrett brought on purpose. Cousin Odell, Aunt Verna, 2 more relatives whose Christmas cards I had addressed for 2 decades, all of them there to witness the second wife get put in her place. Junie waited for me out in the hall and squeezed my arm and said, "You ready?" I said I have been ready for 18 years. And I went in and I sat down at the far end, and I put my hands flat on the table the way I always do, steady, and I did not say one word. Harlan came in last, shut the door, set his briefcase down, put on his glasses. He said, "Thank you all for coming. Some of you may not know that Mr. Vance moved his affairs to me about 3 years back, and that this reading is happening today, in this room, because he asked for it specifically, in writing, down to the order I am to read things. Del Prentice has been notified and has stepped aside, and then he opened the folder and started with the original will, the one Del drew up 8 years ago, and I watched the whole table lean in. Standard language, the executor, the debts and the funeral paid first, and then the part they came for. The real property known as the Vance Ranch shall be sold, and the proceeds divided 50% to my wife Corinne, 30% to my son Garrett, 20% to my daughter Colleen. Investment and retirement accounts the same split. And I watched it happen. I watched Garrett's shoulders come down about an inch. I watched Raylene reach under the table and squeeze his hand. One quick satisfied squeeze, because in her head she had just done the math. 30% of 6.4 million, that is close to $2 million. And the ranch gets sold and cut into lots and everybody gets paid. Colleen let out a breath. Odell leaned back. Verna folded her hands on the table like a prayer had just been answered. This was the script. This was exactly what they came to hear. Harlan set the page down, and he let it go quiet for a second, maybe 2, and I felt that quiet move through the room like a draft under a door. He said, however, and that one word turned every head. He said there is an amendment, a codicil, filed separate 3 years ago, drawn up by me, witnessed independent of Mr. Prentice. Garrett came forward in his chair. What codicil? Del never said anything about. And Harlan said Del did not know. Your father retained me privately for this. And he pulled the second document out of his briefcase and laid it on the table. And he read the morality clause out loud, every word, the same way he read it to me, about any beneficiary who harasses or threatens or sues or tries to seize my property, forfeiting their whole share into education trusts for the grandchildren with me as trustee. The room did not move. And then Raylene's voice came up out of it, high and tight. That is not legal. He was dying. He was not in his right mind. She got to him. And Harlan did not raise his voice a hair. He said the codicil includes a capacity assessment signed by Dr. Warren Seeley on the day of execution, 3 years ago, when Mr. Vance was ambulatory, driving, and passed the evaluation without assistance. It is witnessed by Dr. Seeley and by Roy Dabney. Both are prepared to testify. Raylene opened her mouth and shut it and opened it again, like a woman who had run out of road and kept pressing the gas anyway. And that is when Garrett found his footing, because Garrett is not stupid. He is just wrong. He said, fine, fine. Then we sell the ranch under the original will and split it, and she can keep her claws. We will fight it, but the land gets sold. 50-30-20, just like Dad wrote. And Askew nodded along beside him. And for 1 second, Garrett thought he had found the door. Harlan took his glasses off and set them down on the table. He said, Mr. Vance, I need you to listen close, because this is the part your father wanted you to hear from me, and not from a courtroom. The ranch cannot be sold under that will, because your father did not own the ranch. The whole table went still in a way I have only felt a couple times in my life. Garrett said, "What? What are you talking about? He built it, his granddad." And Harlan reached into the envelope and pulled out the operating agreement, and he laid it flat. And he said, "The Vance Ranch, all 640 acres, has been held since 2008 by Vance Land and Cattle, a limited liability company. Your father did not own the land. The company owned the land. And your father owned 40% of the company. And here is the part that matters. The controlling 60%, the managing member, is and has been for 18 years, Corinne Vance. You could have heard a pin drop onto carpet. I have spent my whole life in quiet rooms, bank lobbies and filing rooms and the soft thud of a stamp, and I have never heard a room go as quiet as that one did. Askew was the first to move, because that is what they pay him for. He said even so, the 40% interest passes through the estate, and under the will that 40%. And Harlan turned to him, calm as still water, and said, and there is the second thing. The operating agreement contains a buy-sell provision, signed by Mr. Vance in 2008, on the death of a member, that member's interest is not distributed as real property. It is purchased by the company at book value, on a formula the members agreed to at the outset. Mr. Vance chose book value on purpose, so that no heir, in any generation, could ever force the ranch itself onto the market. His 40% does not pass to anyone as land. It converts to a fixed dollar figure, and that figure, under the formula your father himself signed, is $800,000. That was the number that broke it. I watched it break across Garrett's face, because 30% of 800,000 is not $2 million worth of hill country cut into ranchette lots. 30% of the buyout, plus his share of the accounts. That is what the will could ever have given him. And it was a fraction of the picture he had been carrying around in his head since before his daddy was in the ground. The land was never on the table. The land was never his to sell. It had not been anybody's to sell but mine for 18 years. And he had staked my pasture and hired a developer and put my name on the internet chasing something that did not exist. Askew went for the last card in the deck, and I will give him this. It was the right card. It just was not going to save him. He said the no contest clause is unenforceable where a beneficiary acts in good faith and with just cause. That is Texas law. My client had probable cause to question the arrangements, and a good faith challenge cannot trigger forfeiture. And he sat back a little, because that is real law. That is the one crack in the wall, and any lawyer worth his fee reaches for it. And Harlan Reeves said, I was hoping you would raise that. And he reached into the envelope one more time. He pulled out a single sheet of paper and turned it around so Garrett could see it, and he slid it down the table. The same way Emmett must have imagined sliding it when he planned all this. He said, Mr. Vance, do you recognize your signature? Garrett looked at it, and I watched him go gray, the color just pouring out of him the way it does when a man recognizes a thing he forgot he ever did. Harlan said, some years ago your father called this family together and handed each of his adult children a complete folder of the ranch's legal structure, the operating agreement, the ownership breakdown, the buy-sell terms, all of it. And he had each of you sign an acknowledgement that you received it and understood you were being given the chance to read it. This is your signature, dated on the acknowledgement that you received and declined to review the operating agreement. You have known, in writing, for years, exactly how this ranch was held. There is no good faith mistake here to protect. You did not challenge this arrangement because you misunderstood it. You challenged it because you never bothered to read the paper you signed for, and you assumed the woman it named would be too small to stand on it. That was the trap. That was the door Emmett had left open on purpose 18 years ago, and again years back at that kitchen table. The folder Garrett threw up on the dash of his truck to yellow in the sun, the one I told you at the very start to remember. A man who never read what he signed had built his whole claim on the theory that nobody else had read it either. And he was wrong about exactly one person in the room. Harlan let it sit, and then he laid it out plain, the way you would to a jury or to a child. He said the letters demanding transfer, the partition petition circulated at a barbecue, the appraisal commissioned before the funeral, the development plan for the subdivision of property your client did not own, the documents, Mrs. Ballard removed from the ranch office and delivered to opposing counsel, and the suit for undue influence already filed. These are the precise actions the clause describes. There is no probable cause where a party has been fully informed in writing and proceeds anyway. The clause holds. Raylene stood up so fast her chair cracked against the wall behind her, and there it was, the whole thing coming out of her at once. She planned this. She got to the doctor. She got to the lawyer. She manipulated a dying man. This is a setup. And Harlan looked at her, and he did not even change his temperature. And he said, "Ma'am, the setup, if you want to call it that, was a man protecting his wife from his own children 3 years before any of you gave him a single reason to. Everything you have done since his death, every post and petition and filing, is on the record. She kept the evidence because you kept publishing it." And Raylene's head snapped around to me, and she said, "You recorded us." And I folded my hands, and I said the only thing I had said out loud in that room since I sat down. I said, "No, honey, I did not have to. You put it all on the internet yourself." Odell was the first one to get up. "The man who wrote the land should stay Vance under a post about me." He stood and he picked his hat up off the back of his chair, and he could not look at me, and he could not look at Garrett, and he just walked out. Verna followed him, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue out of her purse. The two cousins at the end exchanged the kind of look people give each other on a bus when a stranger will not stop yelling, and they got up and left too, and the door clicked shut behind them, and nobody called a one of them back. Harlan finished it in that same flat, thorough voice, reading it into the record. Per the clause, the shares allocated to Garrett Vance and to Colleen Ballard from the estate, being $360,000 and $240,000 respectively, are forfeit and redirected into irrevocable education trusts, one for each grandchild, Wyatt and Casey and Piper, with Corinne Vance as sole trustee until each reaches the age of 25. Garrett said, "Quiet, all the fight gone out of him, so we get nothing." And Harlan said, "Your children get everything, Mr. Vance, and your stepmother manages it for them." Garrett said, "And the ranch." And Harlan said, "The ranch was never part of this estate. It has belonged to Mrs. Vance for 18 years. It belongs to her today." Colleen had not said a word this whole time, but I saw her doing the math, the accountant in her running the columns she did not want to finish. And she said, real soft, "Not to anybody. That is what Dad wanted, though. Is not it? The trusts, the grandchildren. He did not want to cut us out. He wanted to go around us." And she looked up at me, and it was the first real look she had given me in 26 years. And it was not anger. It was a woman seeing her own father clear for the first time, and knowing he had been right to doubt her, and grieving that on top of everything else. Harlan gathered his pages square. He said, "For the record, I will tell you all that this will take some months to work through the court. And Mr. Askew is welcome to file what he likes. But I want you to understand there is no version of this where the outcome changes. Your father did not leave a crack in it. He left it airtight 3 years ago, on a good day with his doctor and his oldest friend standing right beside him. And then he said there was one thing left. One more item to be read here, at this table, in front of everyone, because Emmett had asked for it that way. And he reached into the envelope and took out the sealed white one, with my name on the front in that blocky hand, and he broke the seal. Harlan unfolded the single sheet and smoothed it flat on the table, and he read it in his own voice, slow and even, but it was Emmett's words. Blue ink, that blocky builder's hand I had read on grocery lists, fence posts, and the note in the cedar box. If you are hearing this, then I am gone, and my children have shown you who they are. I hoped they would not. I planned like they would, because a man plans for the weather he expects and not the weather he prays for. But I hoped right up to the end that this letter would get read to a quiet room full of people who had done right by Corinne, and that all my careful paperwork would turn out to be an old fool's worry. If Harlan is reading this out loud, then it did not turn out that way, and I am sorry for it. And I am prouder than ever that I built the wall when I did. Garrett flinched at that. I saw it, his father's voice coming out of a lawyer's mouth, 3 years after he wrote it, reaching across the whole thing and putting a hand on his shoulder he could not shrug off. Harlan kept on. Corinne saved this ranch 18 years ago. She walked into a bank with everything she ever in this world, and she bought back the ground my own partner stole out from under me. And she did it quiet, because I asked her to, because I was too proud to let my kids see me fail. That pride cost her 18 years of being treated like she wandered in off the road. She let it. She never once told you, because she gave me her word. And Corinne Vance has never broken her word to me or to anybody in the whole time I have known her. You spent all those years wondering what she was doing here. She was holding the roof up over your heads. You just could not see it because you never once looked up. I want you to know something else. Emmett wrote, and Harlan slowed down here because Emmett had underlined it. There were years money was tight for all of you. And there was a stretch where my granddaughter Piper needed a specialist up in the city, month after month, for the seizures. And the bills were more than her folks could carry. Corinne paid them, everyone, directly, so nobody would feel the shame of it. And she made me swear never to say. She spent her own money keeping my grandchild well, while my grandchild's own daddy sat at my table asking me for a bridge loan he never paid back. That is the woman you have been calling an outsider. That is the outsider. The room had gone real quiet by then. Colleen had her hand pressed flat over her mouth. And I will tell you the truth. That was the part that got me. Not the ranch. Not the will. Not any of it. Because I had kept that one quiet even from Emmett as best I could, and to hear him say it out loud. To know he had known all along and carried it silent right alongside me. That was 18 years of two people loving each other in the dark, without ever needing to say it in the light. One tear went down my face. Just the one. That is all Emmett Vance ever got out of me, and it was all he would have wanted, because he could not stand a fuss. The letter ended plain. The ranch was never mine to give. It has been Corinne's for 18 years, in law and in every way that matters. I am only sorry I could not be there to say it to your faces myself. Corinne, I am sorry you had to carry this alone as long as you did. You deserved better than my silence. You always did. Take care of the grandchildren. They are the only ones who never learned to look past you. And then just the one letter at the bottom. E. Harlan folded it up and set it down, and nobody said anything for a long moment. Garrett was staring at the table, at the operating agreement, at my name on it, like it was written in a language he had decided years ago not to learn. And he said, not mean, just hollow, like a man scraped all the way out. She always owned it. We never had a shot at the land. And Raylene grabbed his arm and said, do not just sit there. We fight this. Ask you can find a second doctor. We take it too. And Garrett pulled his arm loose. Not rough, just tired, bone tired. And he said, fight what, Raylene? She owns it. She always owned it. And he stood up and pushed his chair in and straightened that loose tie. And he walked out without looking at me. And a minute later, I heard his truck start down in the lot. And that was the last I saw of my stepson for a long while. Raylene left last of the ones who left angry, coat over her arm, heels going fast down the hall. The sound of a woman leaving a building she never should have walked into so sure of herself. Curtis touched Colleen's shoulder and said, I will be in the car. And he went, a decent man giving his wife a minute. And then it was just Colleen and me and Harlan gathering his papers. And Harlan gave me a small nod and stepped into his back office and shut the door soft and left us to it. Colleen did not look up right away. She was looking at the operating agreement still sitting there and Dad's letter beside it. And she said, "Corinne, I copied those papers. I gave them to ask you. I was going to help them take it from you." And I said, "I know." And she said, "He knew too, did not he? Dad knew what we were planning." And I said, "He hoped you would not. That is all he ever did about the two of you. He hoped and he planned for the day the hoping ran out." And she put her face down in her hands, and her shoulders started to go. Not loud, not for show, just the quiet coming apart of a woman who has been shown in front of a whole room exactly who she chose to be and cannot unknow it. I reached into my bag, and I took out the cedar box and I set it on the table between us and opened the lid. The two rings. The photograph of me at the bank counter, not knowing I was being loved. The note. "You kept this place standing once. Now I am keeping you standing." She read it, and she read it again, and she pressed her fingers to her lips. I said, "He did not write that clause to punish you, Colleen. He wrote it because he loved me enough to protect me, and he loved you enough to leave you a test he prayed you would pass." And she said, "And we failed it." And I said, "The trust is still there, growing, for your Piper and for Garrett's kids, too. That is not him failing you. That is him loving you sideways, the only way you left him." And she reached across that table and she took my hand and she held on. And for the first time in 26 years, she was not keeping score. She was just holding on. That was months ago now. The way it settled out was not clean. And I want to tell you the truth about that. Because the stories where everybody hugs at the end are stories. And this was my life. Some of them came around. Odell sent a card that said I should have asked. And I believe he meant it. Verna brought a pie out to the ranch and cried in my kitchen, and I let her. And we are all right now. The two cousins who walked out of that room sent flowers with a note that said, "We are sorry. We did not know." And I planted what they sent by the porch. Others just went quiet, the way people do when they cannot face what they signed their name to. And I have let them stay quiet because I am 72 and I do not have the hours to spend chasing an apology out of somebody who is not ready to give it. Garrett has not called. Not once. Last I heard through Junie, he and Raylene are not doing well, and he is not talking to much of anybody. And I have made my peace with that. If that boy ever wants to sit on my porch and drink my coffee and talk about his daddy, he knows the road. And if he does not, that is a grief I can carry, because I have carried heavier. But Colleen calls. Every Sunday. Sometimes we talk about Emmett, and she tells me things about him from before I ever knew him. A whole young man I never got to meet. And it is like getting little pieces of my husband back one Sunday at a time. And a few weeks ago, the fourth or fifth call, she said something before she hung up that she had not said in 26 years. She called me Mom. I did not make a thing of it. I just said thank you, sweetheart, and told her to give Piper my love. And then I set the phone down on the counter, and I stood very still in that kitchen for a long, long while. The trusts are growing. Wyatt and Casey and Piper, college or a first house or whatever the world charges them for growing up, it will be there. I hung our wedding photo back over the mantel where Raylene had turned it face down during her curtain shopping, and it is face up now, where it belongs. And I took the branding iron down off its nail in the barn, and I set it up there on the mantel too, next to the photo, the rocking V, the name burned into iron that any soul with $2 and an afternoon could have looked up and never did. I sit under the live oak most mornings with my coffee, 640 acres of quiet spread out in front of me, and I lease the grazing out now to a young family just starting, and I think that would have pleased him. So here is what a long, quiet life taught me, and then I will let you go. People look at a ranch and they see the cattle, the fence line, the brand burned into the gate. They never think to ask who paid the note the year the rain did not come. For 26 years, I let this family call me the outsider, the banker who married in at 50, the one who did not belong on Vance land. I let them because Emmett asked me to, and because I had learned something a long time back that they never did. You do not have to prove you belong to a place you are already holding up. Emmett told me at the very end not to let them make me small. It turned out I never was small. I was just quiet, and they mistook the one for the other, the way people do. So do not you make that mistake. The loudest voice at the table is rarely the one carrying its weight. The smallest name on a document is sometimes the only one that matters. Read the paperwork. Thank the ones who stay. And do not ever, not once, mistake a woman's silence for her surrender.